Welcome to the 902 Podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain John Vik, and I want to thank you for listening. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Welcome to the 902 Podcast. We're back in studio today after a little bit of a break. It's been busy.
A lot of sheriffing going on.
A lot of sheriffing to do.
Yeah. Covering. I forgot how even when you're not busy, covering the road makes you busy.
Yeah.
So it just anyway.
Everybody's got a lot of questions and
the phone don't quit.
A lot of stuff to do. And
yes, there's just stuff. So, Sheriff Wagner, Chief Deputy Houchin, thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
And we have a special guest in the studio today.
Whoop, whoop. Very special.
Very.
None other than Investigator Alex Kelly. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thanks, John, for having me.
You are so welcome. And I know you're just staring at me with those dagger eyes right now.
Well, let's explain how excited he's been. He couldn't even sleep. He's been so excited to come onto the podcast.
Did you have any trouble sleeping?
No, it was a great weekend. And
oh, good.
Just a lot of preparation, you know, things of that nature.
On Father's Day.
That's good.
Yeah, it was Friday evening surprise. Hey, come on the podcast Monday morning. I said, oh, this will make for an excellent weekend.
That's about how it went.
There's no need to be intimidated by our podcast because we're pretty laid back here. And,
There's what, 500,000 people listen to it, John?
Right. And very much a family show. So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate that.
We're glad you're here. So speaking of the show and speaking of people that listen, tell us a little bit about Alex and where are you from and how did you get here?
Well, I'm homegrown, I guess you would say. I'm from Lincoln, born and raised. Mm-hmm. Started off in the Capitol Beach area, but grew up most of my life in Southwest Lincoln in various places. My whole family's from here. I've got, some family that lives out of state and whatnot, but my core of my family is kind of Lincoln, born and bred. As far as what got me here today, I guess from are you asking from a law enforcement perspective?
Where'd you go to school?
Well, for high school, since I'm a Lincoln guy, I went to Pius X High School, and then outside of high school, I went to Southeast Community College where I did my general education, and then from there transferred to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for the psychology program.
Awesome. And at some point along the way, you decided to get into law enforcement, or did you have another job out of college?
Yeah, I worked right out of, high school. I bagged groceries for Russ's Market, and then right out of high school, I worked on kind of a landscaping assignment and some grounds crew work, mowing, some things of that nature, right out of high school. And then pretty quickly got in, I think I was 19 at the time, I applied at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Police Department where they had a community service officer. It was like a non-commissioned security position. So I applied there just because I was trying to figure out where I was going to go in life and what I wanted to do. So I applied there, got a full-time job, and started. That would probably be the beginning of my full-time adult work or adult career, I guess, where I worked third shift there for several years. I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do in life.
So you had a popular job there, didn't you?
Very popular,
Yeah,
yes.
Everybody loves you doing what you did there.
Yeah, it's
Can you explain?
highly sought after position.
Explain to the public of why we're talking like this.
So for what I did when I signed up as a community service officer, you work directly with the Lincoln Police Department or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Police Department as their security, and they always kind of referred to you as their eyes and ears. So essentially you were the campus security that would report back to the law enforcement that worked the area. So you would have none of the powers or abilities that a law enforcement officer has, but you kind of have to do that first line work to kind of get the ball rolling on a lot of things. And by virtue of that, just kind of how you see certain things in society today, it wasn't the most glamorous position. You worked third shift. You were uniformed. You were walking residence halls, walking the campus in the middle of the night, and you were just kind of there for safety, security, and keeping your eyes open for people up to no good.
Well, see, and I think when I worked at the university in parking enforcement, that we were probably even less appreciated.
Yeah, if you were thinking from the parking perspective, the group more disliked than the community service officers would be the university parking enforcement.
Yeah, so we might have had the market cornered on disdain.
Yeah, they paid me a visit when I was working, so I feel that.
Right? Yeah. Nobody's above the law, Alex.
That's true.
So you then moved into an officer career there at the University Police Department at some point.
Yep. So I was a community service officer for about 4 years, kind of trying to discern what I wanted to do in life. And when I decided law enforcement was the direction I wanted to travel, I put in when they had an opening for a commissioned officer's position, was selected, and then went to Grand Island and attended the Nebraska Law Enforcement Training Center. I was in the 177th Basic. That was in 2010, I believe, is when I got certified, and I've been working in law enforcement since.
So what, when you said you kind of discern law enforcement, was there something that drew you to that, in particular, or?
Yeah. So when I was kind of trying to figure out what my path in life was going to be, I had two interests. One was law enforcement, and one was something to do with just the medical field in general. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. Obviously I went the law enforcement route, and a lot of that influence came from my upbringing. I grew up around law enforcement my entire life. My grandfather was a detective sergeant for the Lincoln Police Department for 34 years. My dad worked for the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office for 36 years. So I was kind of always exposed to law enforcement. I have some other relatives. My uncle works in New York, Nebraska, their police department. He's been there now for 30 some odd years as well. So I was just kind of always exposed to that. And I knew a lot of people in law enforcement, even as a kid, just kind of grew up around it, seeing it. Saw like my dad's take home car, always sitting outside front for the sheriff's office, things like that, just kind of influence you and kind of influence your decision making. So that was that one thing that kind of, I guess, was always kind of there in the side of my mind.
Yeah. And I think it was around the time your dad retired, then you came over to us as a lateral.
Yeah. I was working at the University of Nebraska Lincoln Police Department. And I think I was from commissioned work about 5 years or so in, and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do as far as my law enforcement career was concerned. And I was kind of assessing where I was at the university and kind of what the opportunities I could kind of future forecast over, the next 20, 30 years potentially. And the sheriff's office kind of came up as a place that would give me a lot of opportunity, things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do at the university police. Just kind of that full career, I guess, from what I was hoping to obtain. And then my dad was around that time on his way out, set to retire, and I thought that might be a good time to throw my hat in at the sheriff's office. And I felt like I brought some years of experience from the university that would kind of be beneficial to me. And I knew a lot of people here, and there was a lot of respect for the sheriff's office. And so I just thought this might be the time for a career change.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're glad you made the jump, and glad that you're here with us now.
You didn't mention what a great boss you could work for.
I got a bunch of papers in front of me. It's in there somewhere.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I just got to flip some pages.
That's needless to say, correct?
Yeah, goes without saying.
Yes.
Well, the reason that we brought you on today, you work in criminal investigations now, but what else have you done since since you came to LSO? And speaking of some of those other career opportunities.
I started off in patrol, which is where most deputies start. I mean, basically everybody starts there at least for field training. I worked all three shifts. So I worked the first shift, second, and third, so days, evenings, and nights when I started off. Moved around to those different shifts in patrol. Then I think my next assignment outside of patrol was a professional standards division, where I was the personnel and training deputy for 3-year rotation. And then from there, I did a bid in.
Really good bosses there too.
Yeah. Chad Bryant, excellent boss.
I like that.
But yeah, I did a 6-month stint then in court services, which I'd never been a part of before. And that was, I mean, you're talking all said and done 14-ish years into my career at that point, probably, when I did a bit up there. And that was a kind of a unique work opportunity as well. And then most recently, I got into criminal investigations, and I have some additional kind of ad hoc duty assignments like crime scene investigation, and I do some digital forensics and other things like that.
Yeah. And so with some of your CSI background and forensic background, you facilitated, Sheriff, you couldn't make it, but Ben and I went through the escape room that you and some of the CSI techs put together last week. That was awesome.
Yeah, we were working on in-service this year for crime scene investigation training for all the deputies, and typically sometimes, standing outside in the middle of summer, lifting prints off of off a window of a car kind of gets tedious, and it's not for everybody. So this year we tried to come up with kind of a new exciting thing or something a little bit different, and we designed an escape room that you had an hour kind of to solve a mystery and to try to catch the killer before the time ran out. And we've heard some really good things about it.
We got our guy, didn't we, Ben?
We did. And we had so much time left remaining for us to solve it.
32 seconds. I mean, this is...
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. We were just waiting to the last end. We knew probably 15 minutes into
It's
it.
kind of like those movies, where there's a bomb and which wire do I cut?
Yeah.
The green one or the red one? And the tick, tick, tick.
It's
tick.
like
Okay.
it's like a TV episode. If we solved it in the first 10 minutes, it's not
Yeah,
entertainment.
no, okay.
So we had to...
We had to ad lib a little bit to make it look good.
Yes,
Exciting.
I'm sure that's what it was.
Yeah.
So, hey, I'm Captain John Vik with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. When it comes to your career, don't settle for good enough. Don't settle for ordinary. We won't either. Be different, be better, be exceptional. Start your future today at joinlso.com. Well, speaking of investigations, Sheriff, this is maybe something that people don't, it maybe doesn't necessarily come to mind when you think of a sheriff's office. I think maybe a lot of people don't realize how big of our job at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office that death investigations are.
Right. Well, and most people don't know that the county attorney, by law, is the county coroner, and they can delegate and do delegate that responsibility to sheriff's officers and police officers. So we do, let's see, I think, Alex, you've got figures too, but I think in calendar year 2023, we conducted about 1,800 or so, plus or minus, coroner's investigations, and many of those are in-home deaths. Some of those are expected deaths in nursing homes. Some are unexpected deaths, and accident, homicide, or suicide as well. So a lot of variety of death investigations.
And so, Alex, you've obviously worked death investigations just on the road as a deputy, but certainly in criminal, and you've also taught, some coroner investigations courses to some of our newer recruits. Help us just, I guess, wrap our head around why do people even do death investigations in the first place, or what are we looking for, and why is that important?
Well, anytime somebody passes away or dies, or we get called out to a death investigation, I mean, we're looking to do a competent investigation to make sure that whatever the circumstances were that led up to that death or contributed to that death, we're trying to ascertain whether those have any sort of criminal nature to them, or whether it's a natural death, just something that occurred naturally. I mean, that's basically the gist of it, is to see if there's a criminality to it or not. And then just to kind of also, I think there's an expectation too from the public that law enforcement can be involved in these. And as the sheriff said, not all of them are homicides. I mean, some of these are natural and anticipated things of that nature. But we just need to make sure that, there's no signs of criminality to it from a law enforcement investigation side. And then just depending on what the circumstances are, that all the information that needs to be known is known, so we can make an informed decision as a law enforcement agency, or if you're the county attorney, signing a death certificate, or other people that are involved in the process.
There's really no bigger type of investigation than it is determining what caused somebody's death and making sure you do everything correctly so that all those answers are done.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, that responsibility that's been given to us by the county attorney's office, it's a big driver for calls for service, but it does make our people better, because they're doing, you mentioned, Sheriff, last year, 1,800 calls. Gosh, Alex, I mean, they're an FTO, you probably do 10, 15, maybe 20 coroner investigations. And that's a lot of reps.
Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity for death investigations. And like I said, I mean, they're not all just like what you would see on like TV or think of from like a crime scene show. Many of them are, like I said, natural causes, and they're not as robust as some of the other investigations you have. But yeah, you get tons of reps. I mean, I remember days in FTO where you might get 5 or 6 calls potentially just assigned to yourself for death investigations. So you get a lot of experience in that.
Yeah. And so the most common type that we get, because again, we don't go to every single death. There's some exceptions we can talk about here in a little bit, but probably the most common one that we go to are out of hospital hospice deaths, right? So they're pretty much expected, with some exceptions to that too. But for the most part, they're anticipated deaths that occur sometimes at a nursing facility, sometimes just at somebody's home. But I guess even in those cases, I mean, we've seen it around the country. There are some situations where even someone that's expected to die, even somebody that's on hospice care, can either be neglected or, in some cases, we've heard of.
We've even had them advance to death before it was time because of individuals' actions and what they have done. So yeah, you have to be willing to look, and you may do a 200, 300, but it's the 301 that something basically criminal has occurred.
Yeah. The other types of death that we would work, I'm thinking just off the top of my head. I mean, we're always looking for stuff that's as a result of an injury, accidental causes. Lincoln being the big city that it is, we do draw a lot of patients at our hospitals from, other incidents that happen in other counties. And if there's an injury at a construction site, I know we had somebody that was working on a roof that fell off here just a little while ago. But we do draw, a lot of those from both inside Lancaster County and counties and cities that are surrounding us, just because of the hospital network that's here.
Yes.
Right. Our burn center, our trauma center.
Yeah.
Cardiac center. So yeah, they do receive a lot of people from outside of Lancaster County, and then we conduct those investigations if they pass away here.
And it's not always to, figure out the proverbial whodunit. But like you said, Alex, it's just to get the facts and circumstances, because there's a process that takes place for death certificates to be signed, and the death certificates are then relied on for, insurance settlements and all of those things that take place. There's a lot of steps and things that happen after somebody passes away. But certainly an important part that we play at the beginning of that process. The thing for me, I always thought that it did give you a chance to really kind of connect that personal service with family members.
Well, you're meeting them at possibly the worst time of their lives.
Yeah. I mean, and you're, a lot of these deaths do, especially the hospice deaths, can't occur at home. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, there's a hospital bed sitting in a family's living room in a lot of cases. And so you're walking into that home. And it really provides, Sheriff, I think, an opportunity for our people to really learn and practice that empathy and just those human to human skills on a pretty regular basis. And I know that's something you're certainly proud of.
And there's really a fine line between, making sure that we treat the decedent with respect and with care, and the family with respect and care, but also be mindful that not every death is as it appears, and we have to be aware of that as well in a very tactful manner. And I think deputies do a great job of that. And when something doesn't appear to be as it should be, I think we're really good at discovering that.
Yeah.
The one thing too is we get these letters a lot from family members, and you do, and I know you always comment on them of just how appreciative they were of the deputy and professional and all that, and you can't speak higher than that.
Yeah. Because one of our responsibilities is an examination of the decedent, and that's going to take place usually where they die, and if that's in the living room, you have to figure out a tactful way to do that with the family nearby, and maybe ask them for a few minutes, or that sort of thing, or so yeah, you have to be very very deliberate and tactful in how we handle things.
Well, it's certainly another type of call that's unique to sheriff's offices that at least here in Nebraska, that not all not all law enforcement officers get an opportunity to be assigned those types of cases. So just another opportunity to really become a well-rounded law enforcement officer. Alex, there are some exceptions to some of these, and a recent example that came up, there was a lady who passed away, or we thought passed away, and was transported from a local nursing home, and ended up at
I will correct, we weren't there, just so we make sure we're part of that.
For sure. And there was a reason that they didn't call us in that case. So just for people that are listening at home and haven't heard the story, she made it all the way to the funeral home, and the person at the funeral home realized that she was still alive when they were, getting ready to do their preparations. Well, that's obviously a problem.
Yes.
And so she was, quickly moved to the hospital, and they provided some additional care, but ultimately she passed away the next day. It was one of those, she was expected to pass. And I think it really just came down to, someone thought she did, and she hadn't completely passed yet. So,
yeah, and I know some people and on our social media and things were discussing, well, why did LFR do life savings at the nursing or at the funeral home? And it's one, they did not have any idea what they had.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, they do what they're trained to do. So that's one thing I want to make sure people understand.
If I'm having a medical emergency, I would certainly rather the fire department shows up and tries to save me than looking through a file drawer to see if I have a do not resuscitate order. I'd rather err on the side of caution on that. But the reason we even talk about this story in the first place is, like you mentioned, Ben, the sheriff's office wasn't called for that particular death. So there are some exceptions to this because, we're provided some guidance, Sheriff, on when the county attorney's office wants an investigation, when they don't. Alex, in that case, I think they had seen a physician within, a certain number of days.
Yeah, I don't personally know all the circumstances from the incident we're talking about. I was out of town at the time, but from a death investigation standpoint in general, and how our internal policies factor into when we would respond to something and when we would not respond to something, or when a facility is required to call us or when they're not, we do have some factors that are in place. So in this circumstance, is from what I'm gathering and just in general, but if a death occurs at a licensed nursing home and it's an anticipated death, there's one thing, and there's multiple things, but and I'll just real briefly go through them. But so if it's at a licensed nursing home and anticipated, that's kind of one check doesn't have to be reported to the sheriff's office. Next thing that they have to have is the decedent has to have been seen by a physician, a physician's assistant, or a nurse practitioner within 7 days of the death. So that's another box that needs to be checked.
Yep.
The physician's assistants, or nurse practitioner have to be willing to sign the death certificate as a natural death.
Right.
There needs to be no suspicious circumstances, and there can't be a prior accident or injury which led to that death. If those criteria, and there's some nuances, but if those criteria in general are met, a call to the sheriff's office is not required for us to respond for a coroner investigation.
And that's what occurred at the Mulberry on that day.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so in that case,
that woman had been seen within the 7-day period. She was a hospice patient and expected to pass in a licensed care facility, and so all those criteria that you mentioned, Alex, were met, and she was transported to the mortuary, and lo and behold, they discovered she was still alive. So,
yeah, and I think for people that maybe aren't in that sphere all the time, especially with hospice patients, death can kind of be a progression of things, and it's not always just just real quick transition from you're alive one minute to dead the next. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's understandable that if you didn't follow all the steps, that you might not necessarily realize that you could see how someone could maybe end up in that situation, but certainly a high profile incident when it does. So not something that we like to see happen on a regular basis, but that's the reason that we do our investigations. So we talked stats a little while ago. Sheriff, you mentioned, about 1,800
1,800
per year
change,
and give or take. And Alex, can you break those down just a little bit further for us?
Yeah, I did some stat research just in preparation for today, and as I mentioned earlier, my time frame, I used a 1.5-year time frame. I went from January of 2023 to June 12th, I think, is when I might have pulled these of this year. So in that 1.5-year period, we have about 2,561 coroner calls in general. So that's just death investigation calls that deputies get sent on of all nature. That could be hospice, that could be fatal traffic crashes, anything. Out of those, I did kind of break down some of our major categories just for numbers wise. OPS coroner calls, which we kind of touched on, which somebody's getting brought to Lancaster County, maybe from a crash or some sort of incident outside of our state.
And OPS means outside police service.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Basically, we're doing a service.
Yeah.
Yep.
For another agency.
Well, the reason why we did those, because we do get a lot of crash victims or
Yes.
those, and if we label them as crash coroners or accidental deaths, that comes on to our stats that occurred in Lancaster.
All of a sudden, it looks like it's a really dangerous place to drive in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Right.
Yeah.
At that point. So that's the reason why we've labeled it the outside police service.
Yep. Or you could have a homicide or somebody gets shot and transferred up here. There's all sorts of circumstances that could play into that. So those are just outside police services where we're doing a portion of the coroner investigation for another agency that's outside of Lancaster County. From my stats that I pulled, we had 47 calls that were cleared that way during that time frame. Accidental deaths, we had 12. Those could just be, I can't think of a great example off the top of my head. I guess you could fall off a ladder while you're roofing, and that could be an accidental death. 7 suicides, 34 unknown cause death investigations. The only thing to clarify on that is some of those are actively still being worked, so that's not a cleared number. You could have an investigation that's just, we haven't reached a point where we can determine what's happened. But occasionally you do have an investigation that we can't quite say. I mean, it could be a natural death, but for whatever reason, there could be some mitigating circumstances or underlying things that just, it doesn't get to that point.
And we just have to rule out homicide, suicide, or accident, and that just leaves a natural death with a cause unspecified.
Yep, essentially, yep. We had 9 fatal traffic crashes during that time period. And then this isn't so much a call, but it is treated a little different because we have some SOPs on it. But for the major hospitals here, so Bryan East, Bryan West, and CHI St. Elizabeth's, we took 170 death calls during that time period to those hospitals. And those can be from a myriad of things, but I'd say most commonly those are going to be ER, emergency room deaths, where somebody gets brought in by Lincoln Fire and Rescue, or even however they get there, and they're in the ER, but they're not admitted to the hospital yet, and they pass.
Yeah, heart attacks, medical episodes, things like that.
Yep. Yeah. Just whatever got them to the hospital, and as long as there isn't suspicious circumstances and they haven't been admitted up to like the upper care floors, we'll work the ERs.
You know, one of the things too we're talking about that we've started to see a rise in, and I think nationally, is the accidental deaths being from drug overdose.
Mm-hmm.
And
fentanyl, lace things,
and those, and I'm hoping those don't continue to grow, but it seems to be a national trend that's occurring at this point.
Mm-hmm. You know, and that's not to say that those are every single death that happens in Lancaster County. We talked about some of those exceptions before too, but the Lincoln Police Department does handle their own, death investigations for those cases that might rise to the level of some sort of suspicious circumstance, or obviously they work their own homicides for the most part, even though the two agencies share resources and things like that, and we help them, they help us, those sorts of things. But those numbers would be reflective of solely the cases that the sheriff's office works.
Yeah, the statistics that I kind of went through are just LSO, where we'd be essentially either the primary agency investigating it, or like in an OPS, we might not necessarily be the primary agency, but we're the ones that did the death investigation. Mm-hmm. We did the coroner report. We cleared it with that information.
And some people might not realize another kind of special kind of death investigation we do are at the prison system. So at the penitentiary or other correctional institutions, and we'll go there to work the coroner along with the Department of Corrections or the Nebraska State Patrol.
Correct.
Even when they have, it's not super common anymore, but when they have executions at the penitentiary, that we'll go out and do the coroner investigation for that, just as a I guess kind of a neutral party that's not the state of Nebraska.
Well, it's it's an unnatural death that occurred in Lancaster County, so that's going to fit the criteria for our response.
Yep.
And we planned that ahead of time, and so we've worked coroner's investigations on every execution that the penitentiary has had since I've been here in 1994. When
Well, with that, though, I don't know if the public, that's classified as a homicide.
yeah, it's justifiable homicide,
Right, but it's still classified as a
It's
homicide.
an intentional death.
And we do a grand jury investigation afterwards.
Yeah. Correct.
And
Every death that occurs in a correctional facility, natural or not, it has to go before a grand jury for determination whether or not a crime occurred. And so justifiable homicide in the case of an execution, or legal homicide, if you want to call it that.
yeah.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
So, Alex, on a death investigation, there's probably somebody listening at home that if they don't, if they don't know somebody at LSO or haven't, been involved in this, they're probably basing what they see on TV. So they're picturing, Matlock or somebody going into a house and how does that actually look in real life as far as who does these investigations and anywhere from a hospice all the way up to a homicide? How does that kind of look in real life?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on what the situation is, will kind of dictate the response to a degree. So, like for hospice death, which is one of our probably highest volume calls that we take when it's related to coroner investigations, that's typically just gonna be handled by a patrol deputy. A call will come in from wherever that facility is, or home, or wherever the individual is, and a deputy will get dispatched out, and they'll talk with the family. They'll talk with medical staff. Typically in a hospice one, you're going to meet with nursing staff that's going to be on scene. You're going to kind of collect that peripheral background information, make your on-scene observations, document everything that you see, and then just make sure everything kind of coincides with what they're anticipating to be the cause of the death, and that the stages, I guess, follow in suit. Yeah. And that would just be handled kind of the deputy level.
Does this make sense? Does the background match the scene? Does that match the examination of the body, and the time frame that we're talking about?
Yep. There would be a lot of the kind of similar things you'll look at during the death investigations that you do, whether it's a hospice death or a homicide or another suspicious death or what have you. Some of them are kind of on a smaller scale, I would say, or they can be done fairly quickly, and people wouldn't notice that you're looking for some of this information to say, hey, there's nothing that needs to be done as far as like a criminal response to this, where we need to call out additional resources or assets to kind of investigate this. So you'll look at all those things. And while we're looking at hospice deaths, just another, like something that somebody might not think of that a deputy's going to look at is somebody might be on hospice for a terminal illness of some kind, and they're anticipated to die. But they might find information when they get there that individual fell down the stairs or something the day before, and now has a bleed on the brain going. And so it might be looked at, well, it was a terminal illness and we expected, but maybe there's this caveat now that they have this injury. So you'll look at those. I mean, those can be just the little things that might pop up, like on a hospice death, that takes it from maybe a hospice anticipated death to potentially an accidental, or, it just depends what the investigation shows. Once you kind of move outside of that and kind of, I would say, into the TV realm of kind of what you were talking about, where that's where you're going to have your suspicious deaths, your criminal deaths, homicides, anything like that. Oftentimes it's still going to be the frontline deputy that gets sent out initially. There's going to be some call that comes in that they respond to. And then while they're there and they're making those preliminary assessments and seeing what's going on, they're going to realize, hey, there's more to this. There's some suspicious nature to this. So they're going to contact, by our SOP, they're going to contact the supervisor and let them know that, hey, we've got some suspicious circumstances down there or wherever they're at. And then they'll coordinate the response. And that could be as in-depth as calling and activating our crime scene investigation unit, could be calling out our criminal investigations division, both of them working together. in having a response with, multiple resources and assets.
And really the sky's kind of the limit then. In that case, you just kind of go where the investigation leads you as far as, what tactics we're going to deploy.
Well, sometimes, some things are obvious, if there's a gunshot wound, if there's a knife in the back, or if there was a crash. But a lot of times we'll get to unintended deaths, and there's not anything really going on there other than you find this individual who passed away laying on the living room floor, and the house may or may not be locked up. And the deputies get there too. So those are the ones you need to take a second to, especially for the road deputies. Okay, what exactly do I have?
Yeah, and to that end, you can get sent to the farmhouse out in the county that there's not much around, and somebody called in because they saw newspapers stacking up at the mailbox for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you go in there and you have an individual that's deceased and has been obviously deceased for quite some time, and just by virtue of the processes that take place when somebody dies, it may be very difficult to determine if there's any injuries to them or what the circumstances were.
Well, that, and with the labs that come back from the blood and things, that's where once in a while your undetermineds become, just because the decomp of the body has gone so long.
Well, so speaking of the labs and things like that, I mean, ultimately, we're coming to conduct an investigation of the death, and one of the important pieces of that is the death certificate that's at the end,
cause of death,
and the cause of death. And there's a manner of death, which is what we talked about, the natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, things like that. But then the cause gets, even more specific to, was it a health issue? Was it, an overdose of drugs? Was it,
was it a stroke? Was it a heart attack?
Sure.
I mean,
was it a gunshot wound?
Right.
All the specific things. Because ultimately somebody, whether it's a doctor or the county attorney's office, is going to have to prepare the death certificate and attest to what the cause of death was. And sometimes they can do that just based on our investigation and the health history and things. And, it's pretty straightforward from there. And then, after we're done with our investigation, then they're turned over to the funeral home, and they go on to make preparations for a funeral. Other times we'll call the county attorney with what we have. And sometimes it's obvious, the knife in the back example, Ben.
Yes.
Hopefully. Or, if it's just one that we don't know, and if we don't have somebody that's comfortable signing a death certificate, then we usually go to autopsy, Alex.
Yeah. So kind of as you're going through a death investigation call, and where we talked about, you could have a physician or a PA or a nurse practitioner sign, you're going to have those circumstances where they're not going to either be able to, or they're going to be unwilling to, which are two different things. But sometimes you'll make the decision yourself that I'm not going to be able to contact a doctor to have them sign. Mm-hmm. At that point, you're going to contact the county attorney, who you'll kind of go over the case information that you have with them, the circumstances, what you're seeing, and through your consultation with them and kind of speaking with one another, you'll make a determination on whether or not an autopsy needs to be scheduled for that individual to give us some more information or not. And then in those circumstances, the county attorney is going to be signing the death certificate.
Yeah. And for an autopsy now, we used to have a pathologist in Lincoln. Now we use a group of pathologists up in Omaha.
Correct.
And I think they probably do most of the autopsies for, southeast and eastern Nebraska out of their Omaha and some from western Iowa too. So they certainly stay busy,
yes,
up there. But those autopsies aren't free either. I mean, those are ultimately end up, being paid by the taxpayers out of county budgets when those are ordered. So we don't order them on every case. I know there's some cases, Alex, where, a family member, may want an autopsy, but we don't order one. And we've, kind of walked through those cases. We may feel that there's enough information to be able to sign the death certificate, but sometimes a family member wants their own. How do we handle that?
Yeah, so typically, if we get to a point in our investigation where everything's pointing to natural, or for whatever reason, through consultation with the county attorney's office, we don't think an autopsy is necessary, but the family is wanting them, we relay that information to the county attorney, just so the county attorney's office is aware of it, if that is a factor or not in their decision making. But if ultimately the county attorney determines that we're not going to have an autopsy, then that would be on the family can order a private autopsy to occur.
And arrange that through a funeral home or through the pathologist directly and go from there.
Yep, and we use, as you mentioned, we use some pathologists out of Omaha. There's 4 pathologists up there that work all of our autopsies, but you can have autopsies done at other locations. So if it's not generated through the sheriff's office or through the county attorney, like UNMC can do autopsy exams. I'm not 100% certain. I don't know if any of like the Bryan Health down here can or not, but typically they're medical doctors that will do them versus pathologists are the ones that we send them.
The forensics.
Forensic pathologists.
Yep. So back to the TV show example. Unlike TV, we don't find out the results by the end of the episode. It's
sometimes really not even close.
I think now we're out to almost 12 weeks on a lot of results. I mean, give or take.
Yeah, that's kind of our going rate that we've been communicating to family and to other law enforcement, to deputies, kind of let people know, because there's a lot of steps that are involved from the pathology side. I mean, you have the physical examination that the pathologist will do of the decedent. And then typically, I would say from my experience, you're waiting on toxicology. That gets sent off so they can test, blood or different fluids for various substances, whether legal or illegal. And that just takes time, just from a myriad of reasons, backlog and just the work that has to be done and things of that nature. So typically 12 weeks is what we're looking at.
Now, that doesn't mean like if it's an obvious cause of death, like a gunshot wound or things that's slowing us down on an investigation. But one of the problems is if you're sitting there and you don't know from the physical portion what happened, it can put you way behind waiting 12 weeks to come back and find out what exactly happened, especially if there's something possibly criminal that occurred.
Yeah, I mean, you could have some substance in the system that you saw no evidence of when you did their on-scene investigation, and it comes back that they have some illegal substance that contributed to their death, and you could have an investigation that then points towards a drug investigation, which resulted in a death that needs to be looked into. But it's possible you wouldn't know that information necessarily. A lot of times you may, because there'd be other outside or peripheral information from interviews, or maybe something you'll see on scene, or criminal history, or some of the stuff that we look into, because there's a lot of things that a deputy or an investigator would look into that maybe people wouldn't realize off the surface.
Well, the one big thing is, and I know the sheriff, and when I was coming through, Chief Deputy Jarrett, you work all these suspicious ones like they're a homicide until you prove they're not. And that way you just make it so that you're not going to overlook or take a shortcut. I think we owe it to the citizens of Lancaster County to do the best job we possibly can on these investigations.
Sometimes we'll even though none of us here are doctors or pathologists, but sometimes you guys will actually attend the autopsy, Alex. So what's a case that you might actually go and attend in person?
I mean, they're going to be case by case and circumstance specific, but I would say ones that you typically would expect to have an autopsy done is going to be any death that's got some sort of criminal element to it, a homicide. We'll get some that we just really don't know what's going on, and there might be enough circumstances that really are giving us pause that we might want to attend. But I'd say typically the most common are going to be like homicides, suspicious deaths, or there's some criminal nature to it.
Yeah, because one of the big things we end up trying to do, like on car crashes, and if they're possibly chargeable there, we have people from the crash team go there so that they can look at what they see as evidence at the scene,
injuries,
and compare them to the injuries of the individual. And then again, with homicides where weaponries or something like that, we send our crime scene techs that were at the scene looking at what's going on so that they have a better understanding of what it is, and they have that firsthand knowledge and can help the pathologist saying, hey, this is what I saw, here's what it is from those scenes.
Yeah, and what's been working really well for us recently, and now I'm in criminal investigation, so I end up attending a lot of these through that position, and then I do crime scene investigations, so gives me more opportunities to attend those. And what's been working really well for us is kind of what you were saying, is when there's an investigation that's going on where there's maybe somebody with some specialized training or skill set, whether that's crash scene or CSI, to send somebody from one of those skill sets, and then send somebody from criminal investigations as well. So a lot of times we'll send 2, or depending, I mean, you could even have cases where we send 3 depending on what's going on, but it's just nice to have somebody that can kind of watch over everything from a criminal investigator side, kind of gather some of those things. You can have somebody from crime scene that's, because there's evidence to collect up there as well. Like, it isn't just
bullets, or
it could be anything. I mean, it just isn't put a person in a body bag, send them to the pathologist, and then you just sit behind the window and watch. There's a lot of times evidence. You might need to collect clothes, fibers, other things that were left with the decedent when they were transported.
Bullets.
Fragments from gunshot wounds, all sorts of stuff.
Well, taking pictures of the wounds in different phases of the autopsy makes a big difference too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of information that can be gathered during autopsy procedures. And obviously, just by the virtue of what's taking place beyond just what I can observe with my eyes when I just see somebody there, as they kind of can get into the different portions of a decedent or the different layers and kind of see things that are, not just on the surface, things of that nature, and then just documenting that as you go.
No, that's why we're doing the autopsy, is try to obtain that information, that evidence.
Well, we've done some previous episodes that touch on this a little bit for people that are listening at home. If you go back to episode 37, where we talked to Live On, Nebraska, where they do organ retrieval. Sometimes we do those in conjunction with an autopsy. With the county attorney's permission, we can even do those in conjunction with, some criminal investigations, as long as we're following, proper procedures and chain of custody and things like that. And then we've also talked to the loss coordination group, which is the local outreach to suicide survivors. And so those are some other things that kind of intersect with this death investigation stuff that deputies are working with on a pretty regular basis. So just a couple episodes for people to go and check out if they have more questions kind of about how those things work together. But we already talked about, working with outside agencies, on this. And just like sometimes, Alex, if you're at an autopsy and you're a lot of times updating, the rest of your team in real time about what's happening, sometimes we'll kind of play that role for maybe an outside agency if somebody's been flown to Lincoln or something to go to the hospital even.
Yeah, I mean, when you're attending these, it's not all just collect information, bring it back, and then assemble it into a report and pass it along to somebody else. A lot of times there's a lot of real-time information that needs to be passed, and whether that's an OPS information for another agency, or if we have our own maybe homicide investigation we're doing, you're at the autopsy collecting this information that might be vital to be relayed back to the criminal investigators that are out conducting interviews or trying to serve legal process or different things of that nature. So sometimes the information you gain does have to be disseminated in real time and isn't just something that we can sit on for a long time.
Yeah, it can make and break a case.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, back to the death that we talked about that was a little higher profile, and for good reason. When you have somebody end up at the funeral home that's not actually dead, it tends to draw some eyes. But I hopefully this has maybe shed a little bit of light on just the process that goes on, at least in Lancaster County, when it comes to death investigations. Unless you have a loved one that has passed away, sometimes, you can kind of forget just how often death happens. I mean, it happens essentially as often as births happen, if we're, keeping the birth rate up.
And the higher our population goes, the more folks that are going to pass away. It's kind of a relative number there. So we work a lot of death investigations.
Mm-hmm. The one thing we need to probably make clear too, though, is if they're admitted into the hospital, now if it's the doctor's willing to sign, we don't get sent to those unless it's a suicide,
some sort
accidental,
of suspicious,
or a homicide. And then even though they've been admitted in, we still go do a coroner report on those.
Yep, and we work pretty closely with the hospitals, healthcare providers, because it's a two-way street. We have information that they need to be able to treat patients, and then they have information we need if we're there either investigating an assault or some sort of criminal event, or for the coroner report after the fact too. So a lot of partners throughout Lincoln, Lancaster County that we rely on to make this stuff all work. Does that pretty much bring us up to speed, Alex? Is there anything I'm forgetting when it comes to the death investigation realm?
No, I think for kind of a general overview, that gives you a pretty good idea. I'd just like to say there's a lot of steps and things that we haven't discussed, but that would be for another day, a different episode, that there's just a lot of things that deputies or investigators or law enforcement from other agencies do when they're working these kind of calls that kind of paint this whole picture. That's not usually just one small area. There's just a tremendous amount of information and a tremendous amount of information you need to find to kind of help you go down these investigations.
Well, and Sheriff, I know you're pretty proud of, all the deputies that are out there working these cases, something we take quite a bit of pride in.
They do a great job.
Yeah. So with that, Alex, we just really appreciate your time. Appreciate you joining us today and shedding a little insight on how the process works.
Yeah. I just want to, there's protocols that we are supposed to do, and there's a reason why we follow those protocols on these types of cases. And each step is important, and there's always a reason why we're doing what we are doing.
Yeah. Till next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That is all the time that we have for today's episode of the 902 podcast. We appreciate you tuning in. Please make sure to follow and subscribe to the 902 podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts to make sure that you can catch all of our episodes and content. You can also check us out on social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, and on TikTok. If you have questions, you can certainly reach out to us by email as well, lso@lancaster.ne.gov. And if you have questions or are interested in career opportunities at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, go to www.joinlso.com, where you can see information about our current openings and also steps and the process on how to get your next career started at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. We hope you enjoyed listening today. Catch you on the next episode.